awarded a grant um, sponsored by HRSA, the Health Resource and Service Administration, called GWEP or GWEP, which is a Geriatrics Workforce Enhancement Program. This presentation today is being brought to you by their good offices, and I'm joined by my very able GWEP Aging Main team, Terry Babcock and Judy Metcalf. Terry will be making sure people get in from the wait room, and we'll also be recording our session. And Judy will help me monitor the chat box, which I encourage you to make liberal use of throughout our time together this morning, asking questions, making comments, and so forth. And you'll see that I like to make pretty liberal use of the chat box itself during the presentation as a way of swapping ideas in this virtual world. Really very grateful to you for making time at this particular time when I know that we're all very busy to come and learn more about how to better support people who are living with dementia. So I thank you for all that you do and for being here and for what I anticipate will be your very active participation. So thanks. Mention the session is being recorded. It will be made available to you in about a week's time. So make sure that we have your right email address. The one that you used at registration is the one to which we will send the recording. You will also be asked to take a survey immediately after the training today, and I'd really be grateful if you could fill it out immediately. It's quite important to us to find out, get some feedback, but also to our sponsors, the HRSA grant funders. So you're going to get a link to the recording, you'll get all the modules, and then we will ask you each month. We'll just send a very quick questionnaire that will basically say, have you used any part of this training in the last month? Have you taught anybody else any of the material? Have you found it useful in your day-to-day work, whatever it is? And if the answer is no, that's fine, but please fill it out and answer it even if it's no. And again, this really will help us to be able to maintain programs like this with our grant funders. We are muting everybody at the start just to keep down the background noise. So please, as I said, make liberal use of the chat box. Because I'm presenting as well as trying to monitor people on the screen, I'll ask you, if you wish to speak, to put that in the chat box rather than raise your hand, which is another kind of Zoom way to do it, because I may not see it. And if you'll just say, I have a question or a comment, then Judy or Terry will let me know. The spirit of today's training is this. I believe, quite based on experience and quite fervently, that everybody is right now doing the best they can. I don't think there are any slackers on this call, and I don't think that there are people who are operating in this space from the standpoint of not knowing anything. So you already know a lot. But I love the way Maya Angelou encourages us to do better. So let's start with the assumption that I know that you know stuff, and that I know, and you know that I know, that you're doing the best you can. But I also want to make sure that we are all continuing to push ourselves so that when we know better, we do better. Because if there's one thing that's true about supporting people living with dementia, is that we have learned a lot in the last 10 years. I've been at this for over 35 years, and the explosion in knowledge in recent years is really pretty remarkable. So if you, like me, are an old timer, be prepared today to challenge yourself, to set aside what you know or what you think you know, to stretch yourself and to see how, if there are any new ideas, how they resonate with you. It's really interesting to me in designing a training for trainers to reflect on the fact that we have 4 generations represented now in our workplaces, okay? And so based on our registration, I took a quick look through to see just how true that was for us today. So we have with us today people ranging in age from 20 to 70 plus. And this is kind of the breakdown, the composition of our group that's gathered here today. And Judy and Terry and I were talking about it before we started, and really kind of rejoiced in the fact that there are so many young people who are entering this field than so many older adults who are staying in this field. And of course, we're grateful for everybody in between. But this is our spread on today's call. So this means to me that we have a lot of people with less experience ready to learn. We have people with a lot of experience whom I hope are also ready to learn. And then people across the lifespan ready to share with each other. We're going to go over 4 modules today. If any of you heard about the training we did last week, specifically targeting nursing homes, you may know that there were 5 modules. You're not getting gypped. These are the 4 modules that are relevant for the work that you do, because today's session is really about people who are supporting people living with dementia in sort of non-facility-based care, even though I know we have folks from congregate living. At the end of our time together this morning, I hope that you will be able to really implement some of the key principles of person-directed and person-centered care in your day-to-day work now. And if you're already doing all of them, then to simply validate the good work that you're doing. I also hope that you'll leave this morning with an idea about how you are going to share this information, what I call creating a dementia training roadmap. So whether it is going to be by modeling in the workplace, whether you plan to hold some little in-services, whether you plan to simply pass on the slides, think about how you're going to share this. And that will be one takeaway. And then we're going to have an opportunity today to talk about the impact of COVID on all of this. And you should be able to list a few ways, and at least 3, to address the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're going to start off with some virtual engagement. Imagine many of you, like I, are teaching in the virtual environment quite a bit. And we've started using a variety of tools to try to create a sense of a learning community while we are online, while we are in webinars in this virtual space. We're going to do that. Then we're going to go through the modules, and then we'll close with looking at some action steps, because I'm quite certain that for this to have been a good use of your time, you need to have some things that you can do with it and not just learn about it. And so that's what I've tried to do, and that's what I hope you will find that we have achieved. So to start off with that chat box, what I'd like to ask you to do is to name one thing you'd like to learn today. What is your learning goal? Why did you come today? Think about this sentence. This will have been a good use of my time if I learn XYZ. And if you would put those in the chat box, I'll tell you how we're going to use them. So please start typing while I'm talking. I'll do a quick scan of those to make sure that I am planning to hit the key things you'd like to learn. But we will also take your questions and take those goals. And if I didn't get to them, we'll be saving the whole chat. We will address them in an email in our follow-up. So let me know what will make this worthwhile, and I will. How to support older adults. I think getting just part of that message, how to support older adults with cognitive impairment, I assume is the rest of that sentence, but can't see the whole thing. Some people are writing right on the screen. That's fine. It'll be a little less distracting if you could write it in the chat box. Innovative approaches, family caregivers, relationship between autonomy and safety. You know, I don't have that directly in the talk today, but if you will make sure to remind me of that in the Q&A, it's one of my favorite topics, and I'll be happy to talk about it. Just better assisting the clients that are served, how to help people not feel quite so overwhelmed. And then we're going to particularly be looking at our public housing communities. Okay. I think I've designed the right training for you, but as I say, what I don't get to, I'll make sure that we do. The next thing I'd like to do, by way of creating our virtual community, is to ask you again to type in the chat box how you're doing today, right this minute. You know, one of the disadvantages to teaching in the virtual world is that we are absent the kind of cues and the clues that we get from one another about, you know, how everybody in the room is doing. So one thing that I like to do is to simply start off by asking, how are you doing? So please, in a word, how are you today? And I'll wait for a moment while you answer those. So some frustration from people with a lousy internet. I've been there. Not there today, a little anxious, holding up okay, feeling the stress, working through it as it comes. Feeling okay, cold, me too. It is cold here as well. I don't know where that person's writing from. Great. So we have some folks who are dealing with supporting people living with dementia, both in the personal and in the professional domains, and feeling good, grateful, motivated, worried, overwhelmed, coping, good. The other reason to have you do this, in addition to my being able to get sort of take the pulse of the room, is because I want you to see that we are all likely to be in different places some of the time, and we are likely to be in the same place some of the time. And so what I like to know when I'm having a bad day is that the person next to me isn't. So I can turn to them and say, got any tips for how you seem to be coping? Or I'm glad to be sitting next to your positive energy, or whatever it is. Now, we're not literally sitting next to one another, but you get the idea that just knowing that we live and work in communities where some of us are going to be having better days than others. Some of us are going to have just as bad days as we are, so we're not alone with that. And it's important to keep in mind, and I would say if you do a lot of virtual trainings, to adopt some practice like this, so that it feels a little bit fuller and a little bit more real. Okay. And then the other training tip, of course, is taking polls. So I've told you about the age range of people that we have here today. I haven't told you that we have people from a variety of roles. We have a number of case managers. Whoops. We have res service coordinators, we have case managers, we have some exec types, we have some students, we have a variety of learners. And what I'd like to do now by saying who's here is have you take this poll. Darn it. Every time I go for my poll, I forward the slide. Let's see. There we go. And if you would just vote or select one of the choices, whether you're from a community-based organization, if you are a student, if you're from home health or hospice, we see that the area agencies on aging and aging and disability resource centers are very well represented here. We have some folks in congregate living, and that could be public housing, could be assisted living, but wherever few people are living. And I'm glad that I did put up home health and hospice because we only had 2 registrants from people who are involved in that work, but I'm glad that I didn't miss you. Well represented by the AAAs and ADRCs this morning, and I hope that this information will prove useful to everyone. And we did have a student show up. 78% of the vote is counted, so that I don't have to do a recount. I will wait one more minute to see if we can get up to at least close to 100%. And so the 10 of you who haven't quite yet voted, if you would please, maybe they've had to step away from their desk. One more has come in, there we go. Those absentee ballots. 43, okay. Let's call it right there. So people who work, people who volunteer are largely affiliated with the area agencies on aging, though again, we have good representation across the board. And in any case, I thank all of you for being here. And this is who's in the community and whom we can call on to share their experience in different domains. So very nice breadth and depth of experience in our learning community this morning. Let's pause for a moment of reflection about this fundamental truth. This has been one hell of a year, pardon my language, and it's not over yet. You know, when I reflect on this year, which I not infrequently do, I am really struck by the fact that not only have we been dealing with this COVID pandemic, but we have been dealing with a particularly divisive and sort of hostile, vicious election year. We have been dealing with a tremendous misinformation campaign. And even if it weren't misinformation, it's not really a misinformation campaign. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's just an explosion of information about everything as we try to take in the pandemic. Not to mention the way in which COVID has once again exposed the tremendous health and social inequities in our systems. And with that, we also had the death of George Floyd and many other deaths, which exposed the tremendous propensity for violence that we have and the great racial divide. That's a lot to take in. And it's that context that we're all doing our work in. So the bottom line for me about this year is that no one's been untouched by this. No one has been untouched by COVID, whether you know anybody who's ever been sick or not. It has upended weddings and births and graduations. It's upended the way we even do our shopping. And we live with this tremendous uncertainty, which is not something actually that we're that comfortable with, particularly health professionals, I think, who are used to being, if not in control, at least kind of having a sense that we know what we're doing. This has challenged all of that. And it's taken a toll, both in terms of being a powerful stressor biologically and psychologically and socially and spiritually and the whole gamut of human beings. It's really touched us at the community level as well. So I just want to validate that. I want to acknowledge it. We're not going to stay with this, but I do want to acknowledge that many of us are getting pretty darn tired. I'll speak for myself in that this whole experience really has required paying really close attention to all of the antidotes that I'm going to talk with you about today. But it's exhausting to put up with this much stress. So before we begin our new learning, I'd like to just ask you to breathe with me. I'd like to validate the context in which we learn and then ask you to set it aside. Compartmentalize it. It's not a dirty word. Compartmentalization is actually a good skill so long as you remember what you put in the closet. Okay? I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to ask you to put both feet on the floor. I'm going to ask you to put your hands on your knees. Close your eyes if you wish, but you don't need to. And I'd like you to just take 3 deep inhalations through your nose, hold it, and then exhale slowly. And I'm going to do it, and it'll take us about 40 seconds. Last one, deeply into the belly. Okay, freshly oxygenated. Let's continue. Whoops, somehow. I keep getting into the picture. Let me see how I can move this slide. There we go. And then finally, the other refresher that we're going to do today is every once in a while, you will see this little symbol. And one of the challenges of learning in the virtual environment also is staring at the screen too long. So periodically, you'll see this slide. And what it will ask you to do is stretch. Stand up, do it from a seated position, move your hands over your head, twist in your chair, do whatever it is, but move your body. And then for those of you who have a window to look out of, look out the window, enjoy something from the natural world. It's really good for opening up psychological space, makes new learning easier. For those of you who are in a room without a window, there's a nice picture for you of somewhere in Maine. Okay, let's hop into our first module, if we could, which is really about how to achieve, maximize, optimize care and support for individuals living with dementia. At the end of this particular module, again, I hope that you'll be able to describe some of the guiding principles to a coworker. I hope that you will always use person-first language if you don't already, and then describe some ways to reinforce person-centered care. For starters, I'd just like to remind us how important language is. Those of us in the aging field know that there has been a big movement to reframe aging and to start being mindful of the way we refer to people who are older. And currently, the preferred phrasing seems to be older adults. I gotta tell you, not everybody likes it. Some people still prefer being referred to as seniors. Some people think that elder is more elegant. The important thing about language is to know the culture that you work in and to know what is considered most respectful. For the most part, we just address people by their names or by their by the way that we know them. But when we're talking about groups of people and we need a label or we want a way to categorize, right now we use the term older adults. The one that I find that I'm exquisitely sensitive to is how I refer to people that I'm working with. If I'm in my office or in the hospital or in a nursing home and I clearly am in a doctor-patient relationship, that person is my patient and it means something to both of us. And it carries with it a certain responsibility on my part. But when I'm just talking about people living with dementia, I don't refer to them as my patients. And what I have found really hard, I think, for a lot of medical professionals is to turn off that particular lens. Because I will hear a lot of people referring to people that they're seeing in their homes as their patients throughout the whole course of the encounter. Now, granted, when home health or when nurses or when doctors or anybody's doing a home visit, there is an aspect of the interaction in which that person is your patient. That's why you're there. But when you're in somebody's home, they're really so much more than that. And who they are matters a whole lot more than what they have or why you're ministering to them. So I'm very conscious, and particularly in long-term care, I'm very conscious of referring to people who live in long-term care as residents and not as patients. So again, language really matters. What we know from neuroscience is that language shapes how we think. It doesn't just reflect what we think. So we want to be careful about the words we use because we're shaping our thoughts. We're laying down certain foundations about how we think about people. And this is why this is so important. The whole language of care partnering, caregiving, caretaking is really undergoing a transformation as well. Most people living with dementia prefer the term care partners to remind their care partner and themselves that they are equal in this, that they may be the person with the dementia, they may be the person with the need, but they are still an adult who has other aspects, if you will, of their personhood than just having dementia. So care partners, particularly for people who are very conscious of living with dementia and may be at an earlier stage, definitely prefer the term care partners. Some caregivers resist the term care partner when they see their roles so clearly as caregiving. There's not a right way or wrong way to do this. There's just a mindful way to do this. And so the thing about language mattering is that it does. So it's why we ask people how they like to be addressed. By what name do they like to be called? We don't give people pet names. We don't use nicknames until being invited to do so. It's that kind of thing. And then finally, what I want to say about person-centered and person-directed care is that this is another area where those two terms tend to be used somewhat interchangeably, and yet I think they do mean very different things. I tend to think of patient-centeredness and person-centeredness along a continuum of care. And a lot of people have said, well, the patient or the person has always been at the center. But it doesn't mean that they're like at the center of your focus. What person-centered care really means is that that person's hopes and dreams and wishes and preferences and choices, their goals drive care, their goals drive support, which is why I have kind of tended now to use more often the term person-directed to really drive home the point that the person that I'm serving is not just the object or the focus of my attention, but what I'm doing for and with them is determined by them. Okay, so I I will use them kind of interchangeably because person-centered has always meant person-directed to me. But now I feel a little bit like I have to underscore it a little bit. Pay attention to your own language. This is one of those areas where when you are sharing this back with coworkers, you don't want to give them a lecture like I'm giving you. This is something that people get because you model it, because you are sort of faithful to it. You do it all the time. And that's so much more important than telling people what is, what is preferred language. I do it here because this is the only choice I have. We don't work together. So all I'm really asking you to do is pay attention to the way you speak about people, how you speak to them, and to model it in your workplace. Now, person-centeredness and this focus on person-centeredness and making sure that we put the emphasis by using person-first language matters for several reasons. One, person-centered care has become so popular, if you will, or such a driver, because it works. You get better outcomes when the person whom you're serving, whether you are supporting them in the sort of more community sense or whether you are caring for them in the more medical sense, when they are partners in their care, when they have a voice in their goals, you get better outcomes. It's kind of as simple as that. And this was first used actually in the medical communities when we talked about patient-centered care back in the 1970s. And it was very clear that people had better outcomes when their doctor engaged with them in what they were trying to get out of their healthcare. And as you know now, there is another wave of transformation of healthcare, which is called creating age-friendly health systems, which is part of what our grant is about. And again, we focus on finding out what matters most to the older adult, what matters most to the person living with dementia, because things go better when you do, you get better outcomes. So that's one reason. Another reason is that for at least this training and for Dementia Reconsidered, it really does reflect our core values. And it reflects our fundamental appreciation for the humanity of the people that we serve. That what is of interest to us is our common humanity and not just what they have. Not only that, person-centeredness reflects our commitment to people who serve, so that our interest is in both the person living with dementia and their carers or care partners. And then finally, we emphasize person-centeredness because it's the law. All people have a right to self-determination. All people have a right to have their voice heard. And if you are in a congregate setting that is federally funded in any way, then in addition, it is a requirement, a condition of participation in the language of nursing homes. So as I said before, when I use either of these terms, person-centered and person-directed care means quite simply that everybody has strengths, gifts, contributions to offer, hopes, dreams, and desires, ability to express preferences, needs, make choices. And these are what should be driving our planning even during a pandemic. Okay, and we can talk about how hard this is and how it doesn't mean everybody gets their way. Okay, sometimes I think people make that mistake when I say, somebody's choices and strengths and so on drives care. They say, well, they may not know what they want or they may not know what's good for them. And then I will probably argue back that most of us do know what we need. We know what we believe to be good for us, and we need to have a say even when we are mistaken in the eyes of others. Okay, so this is really very fundamental. One of the ways that you can do it, again, just as a simple way, is making sure, and particularly during COVID, particularly when we've had to place restrictions on certain kinds of activities, make sure that you actively, not passively, you actively identify and honor at least one choice or preference for a person living with dementia. This is really easy to do, actually. If you are back to face-to-face visits, then the simple act of saying, I can come on a Tuesday or Wednesday, what is better for you, is a way of reinforcing and having the person at kind of a conscious and unconscious level really feel like they are in the driver's seat. If your providing your services all virtually. I can call you Monday or Tuesday. What day works better for you? I can call you in the afternoon, or I can call you in the morning. What works better for you? I'm sorry, I only have afternoons open this week. Would you like to still meet this week? I know it's not your preferred, or we could wait and meet next week. Whatever it is always about identifying and then honoring the simplest of choices, because this sends the message that the person you're serving is really at the center of your attention, and not your institution's needs, not your personal needs, not even the needs of the care partner. Unless for that engagement, it is in fact the care partner or the caregiver whose needs have primacy. Because in every relationship, there's a little bit of a back and forth, right? So the idea here is that we do have some tools at our disposal that are really simple if we just remember to use them. Personhood really matters so much, and it's why we always use person first language. I don't think you'll hear me, at least I hope you won't, ever refer to somebody as an ick. I don't refer to diabetics. I don't refer to schizophrenics. I don't refer to my demented patients. I refer to people as people living with something or people having something. And if you just get in the habit of not talking about my behavior patients or my hospice patient or my this patient, and instead talk about a, not my, but a person living with X, is who I'm serving this week or whatever. It really does make a very big difference. It'll begin to shape your thought process in a way that you won't be able to do anything but person-centered care, which is a good thing. Now, I would love to spend like the next long bit of time introducing you to an organization called the Dementia Action Alliance. But I don't have time for that, but I will ask you at the end of this, at the end of our session, to check out their website. Dementia Action Alliance, and this will be, I think, particularly near and dear to folks from Vermont, is the dementia arm, if you will, of the Nothing About Us Without Us disability movement. These are people who are living with dementia, and what they would prefer, I say, and so I always have to remember, is these are people who are living well with dementia. And it is important to have this, this frame in mind when thinking about people who are living with dementia. So I'm going to play just one clip, very short video clip, but I got to tell you, there are a bunch of them on the website that are worth a listen. Let's give this a try.
I want to live life to its fullest and live every moment the best I can.
This is another page in a new chapter in your life, and you will go through it, and you will be a better, stronger woman for it.
We're just going to say, we are the people with dementia. We are the advocate. This is what we want. And, well, get out of our way because we're coming.
I'm Dr. Elaine Wiersma from Lakehead University. Since women are affected and impacted more by dementia, we need to better understand their experiences to ensure that services are meeting their needs. Interviews and focus groups were conducted with women with dementia across Ontario. Although there were many key findings from the research, the most important finding was the courage and the strength of women living well and living strong with dementia.
Dementia can come very fast, very quickly, and so we do not take for granted things that other people do. We really don't.
Getting the diagnosis changed who I was and the way I saw things. Something clicked in my brain. It turned off one area of my brain, or my thinking and processing area, but it's turned on another area of my brain.
You develop an urgency. There's a cause. You could be an active, contributing member of society. And don't let anyone tell you you can't be. We are.
We truly do our best to embrace every single day. We just keep saying, well, why wouldn't we do that? Why won't we do this? Why can't we do this?
One door closed and that chapter of my life is over, but another door opened. And now I have this big passion and I want change and I want things to be different for people living with dementia now or those coming up behind me who get dementia.
It's a story about being the best that you can and being supportive of each other and loving each other and recognizing our differences and really just embracing that.
There is an inner strength that women seem to have from a core within us. Whatever crisis we have, we go through it and we pick up the pieces. And I think we are stronger in the end for going through them.
I'm going to be able to support other people walking through the same journey I am. I am going to be the butterfly that comes out of that cocoon, and I am going to soar forward and really make it worthwhile.
All right, let's see here now how I get out of my there we go. Okay, those are your mentors. And I encourage you to learn everything you really need to know about dementia from the people living with it. And one resource for doing that is definitely the DAA website. Back to that chat box. And what I'd like to ask you to do is, in one word, give an impression of the women in this video. When you think about them, or when you tell somebody about this later, which I hope you will, what will be the one word you use to describe them? Yeah, I'm seeing inspiring, amazing, powerful, self-aware, in control, strong. That is the message of this training, and that is the message of those women. And what I really want you to understand is that this is possible throughout the course of the illness if we look at people this way. Okay, unafraid, courageous. Yeah, I think courageous is one that comes up a lot for a lot of people. So thank you. Thanks for watching and thanks for sharing your impression. The third principle that is really kind of underpins this whole thing is the notion that behavior is communication. There are a lot of behaviors that are called challenging or problematic or distressing, but which is true. I mean, some behaviors are very challenging for people with and without dementia. But the real message here is that when people are behaving in a particular way, it's because they're trying to tell us something. All behavior has meaning. Behaviors are not just symptoms of an illness. They are not symptoms of dementia. They are trying to communicate some need, some feeling, some intention, about some aspect of a person's identity. So the thing that we always ask ourselves first with respect to behaviors is, what is this person trying to tell me? What am I not getting? So recap from this first module is this: language matters. Use person first language. Who a person is really matters. So every encounter you have is an opportunity to listen to a story. Behavior is communication. I will always ask, what is this person trying to tell me? Sorry about that. And finally, do visit that DAA website to see more videos. Time to stretch, 30 seconds. Stand up, sit down, twist up, whatever you like, but move your body so we can close that set of ideas and move to the next. When I teach about dementia, I really try to think about this from 2 points of view, and it's not an either or. It's not one is better than the other. It is a both and kind of thing. And I'll tell you, I think this is a little bit hard for Western minds to grasp. Everything around us, it tries to get us to pick either or. It's either this or it's that, or you're a this or you're a that. But actually, for the most part, the way things really are is that we live in a both and world. And if we really want to have a full view of people that we serve, we will begin to adopt this kind of both and headset. So when we talk about dementia, we're going to talk about it from the outside in, which is our usual viewpoint, right? It's usually we look at a person with something and we understand that what. This is, again, a good thing that we do this because it's a frame of reference that's needed. At the same time, we need to know what the dementia looks like from the person who's living with it. How does it impact their function? What does it mean to them? What worries them about it? What doesn't worry them at all about it? What are they experiencing with it? So we look at what it is, and we look at who has it, and we look at who they are, not just with their dementia, but who they are, period, full stop. Okay, just a quick reminder, I suspect for most of you, of what the term dementia means. When I use dementia, I am referring to it as a syndrome. Dementia is an umbrella term. It's not a diagnosis. Dementia always has a cause, and the most common causes are there on your screen. And I just realized I'm not in presentation mode. Hang on one second. Whoops. I'll fuss with it later. The most common causes of dementia you're very familiar with: Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia or vascular disease. Frontotemporal dementia is a cause of dementia, Parkinson's disease, dementia with Lewy bodies. In other words, there are many, many causes of dementia. And we tend to use the term interchangeably with just Alzheimer's disease, but please keep in mind, there is more than Alzheimer's disease causes dementia. And the important thing to know about dementia also is that it impacts many areas of cognitive function, not just memory. And in fact, for people with Alzheimer's disease, for whom memory is commonly a very early symptom, very early sign, other parts of their brain are actually relatively preserved. So that people living with Alzheimer's disease, for example, may have lousy memories, particularly short-term memory. They have no problem with long-term memory. Their personalities, for the most part, remain pretty much unchanged. And they are able to hold conversations because they still have the power of attention. People with frontotemporal dementia, on the other hand, may find changes in their personality pretty early on, whereas memory is relatively spared. So you need to realize that when you are working with somebody who is living with dementia, that what you learned about the last person that you were working with who had dementia belonged to that person, and that each person living with dementia will have a unique presentation. The other important takeaway from this is that people living with dementia, people with dementia may have a reversible dementia. So one of the things that you can do always as for the people that you serve is to make sure that they have had a really good workup, because there are some drugs that can cause a reversible dementia. That is to say, cognitive decline in many areas of function slowly over a period of time. And so you don't want to miss the opportunity to ask whether or not somebody's had a good workup and to help them ensure that they get one. The other big cause of dementia that is reversible is, of course, depression. It used to be called pseudo-dementia, but really the dementia of depression is dementia due to depression. There's nothing pseudo about it. It looks like, sounds like, affects the person like other leading causes of dementia. So drugs and depression are the two takeaways. There are many other reversible causes, but we don't have to worry about those right now. We want to go for the two biggies. So always ask, did this person have a workup? Is the cause of the dementia known? If it is not, help them find out. This is a mnemonic that some people find very helpful to remind themselves that dementia affects more than just memory. It affects language, and that's both understanding words as well as using the spoken word. It affects knowing what something is, knowing what an object is for. Some people may be able to hold up a cup and recognize it as a cup, or hold up an iPhone more commonly and know that it's, and say iPhone, but have no idea what it's used for. So agnosia is about kind of knowing not just the word and its meaning to state it, but what it is for. And then, of course, the other problems that confront people with living with dementia is not being able to put an idea into action, what we call ideo, idea, motor, function. Okay, so ideo is the idea, motor is the doing. And when you have idiomotor dysfunction, we call that apraxia. And so this is why, for example, a person who likes to get dressed on their own, knows they want to get dressed, knows it's time to put on their jacket, may have trouble putting one arm into one sleeve and one arm into the other. Even though they know that's what they want to do and they know it's what it's for and they know it's called getting dressed, they may not actually be able to execute it. So assisting somebody executing something like that in a way that honors their strength, the fact that they can do part of it, is a critical part of a strength-based, person-centered approach to dementia care. And then naming and I don't know what the last one is there. Oh, apathy or feeling states is the next one on that list. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so I can reclaim my screen in a way that I prefer. For some reason, let me just do this. Okay. So interestingly to me, many people find it very, very helpful when looking at dementia from the outside in to have some handle on what the brain does and how impact on different parts of the brain might be impacting behavior. The reason I frame it like that is that I don't want you to get the impression that it's a one-to-one correlation, that, well, if somebody has a frontal lobe problem or frontotemporal dementia, they're always going to behave like this because we know what the frontal lobe is for. It's not quite that straightforward, but generally speaking, when people understand that behavior is related to a malfunction, a miswiring of part of the brain, it does help many workers take some behaviors less personally. For our purposes today, it's enough to know that the frontal lobe is the seat of executive action. You're going to hear about this in relation to your own brain in a moment. But it's the seat of executive action. It's planning, it's sequencing, it's organizing. It's where wisdom and judgment and all of that is present. And the hippocampus is the part of the brain that's most involved in memory. And you hear about the hippocampus a lot in Alzheimer's disease trainings because it is the part of the brain that is first and most dramatically impacted in dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. And then the amygdala, which sits right next to the hippocampus, is another critical part of the brain that is impacted very early on in dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. And the amygdala is so important because it really is like the fear center. It's the emotional responsive part of the brain. And it really is correlated to some of the hard to understand outbursts that sometimes people with Alzheimer's disease will have to what looks to us like kind of a minor stimulus. Now, people living with Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia, but this was staged with Alzheimer's disease, tend to think about, and I think professionals are particularly guilty of this, tend to think about the disease in terms of its deficits. And I find that even family members, as well as a lot of both medical and non-medical health workers or support workers, always want to know, what stage do you think this is? Is this middle or late? And I've puzzled about this so much because I'm not sure how that really helps us very much, giving it a label. So what I like to train instead is staging of Alzheimer's disease from a strength-based perspective, because this does help you in your care and service planning. It's important for you to know that early on, people are perfectly capable of, somebody's just sending me a message as to why I can't get my screen. Okay. But somebody send me a text and tell me you are at least seeing the slides, right? So that mystery is, however, solved. Okay, so if you will stage things according to or use stages according to a strength kind of paradigm, you will find that this will be very useful to you in a way that, frankly, I don't think that deficit. Oh, you're not seeing the slides. That's the message coming in. Thank you very much. I was a little slow on that uptake. Let me see why that is. Are you seeing them now, team?
No, you're not sharing your screen right now, Dr. Wehry.
Thank you, Terry.
You're welcome.
Let's try this again. Are you seeing them now?
Yes.
Okay.
Sam,
Oh,
you
you missed so many good things, guys. Let's see if I can get this down to here. This may be where we lost it because I went to the video. You can look at them when you get them. You've got them in your PDF, I hope, if you got your email this morning. And now I will just go through these very, very quickly. Here's the slide I wanted you to see when I was talking about dementia as an umbrella term. Here's the slide I wanted you to see when I was talking about reversible causes. And here's the slide for your quick tip. Always ask, did the person have a workup? Here are the 6 A's. And here's the brain. Okay, thank you very much for texting me to let me know all of that. It's very, very much appreciated. Where I was getting very excited here was about this notion of deficits versus strength-based planning. And what I was saying is that in the early stage, it's really important to know what a person can do, because then I think that both care partners and service support workers can focus on what will be a source of pleasure and meaning and comfort and not frustration to people, and can really begin to make plans together with a person living with dementia according to these strengths. Many people living with dementia are often, really amazed by and sometimes amused by the fact that they can remember things from long, long ago and can't remember what they had for breakfast. And I talk with them about why that is in the brain, if they're interested in knowing why that is in the brain, but more importantly, talk with them about, well, then let's talk about what was the long, long ago, because those memories are often very rich in meaning and also rich with emotions. So using a strength-based approach, I think using a staging approach to look at strengths is useful. I have less use for a deficit-based approach. And so my clinical work, I never used it, though I know sometimes insurers want it. And so we do sometimes things for insurance people and admissions people that we don't do for the person we're serving. The final thing I really want to point out to you is that even people in the latest stages of dementia, when they no longer have any language, when they no longer have any recognition of other people, will always, to the moment of death, know the difference between a kind word and a harsh word, a rough voice and a kind voice, a soft touch and a harsh touch, and keep that in mind. That the person is still in there, their humanity is still in there, and so we treat them as though they know what we are communicating, because they do. So that's the what. And it's really good for health professionals to know the what, to know about symptoms and treatments and to be able to make some decisions about care. It's really important for policymakers to know what people living with dementia need, want, have, what kind of resources we need to plan for. And it's really important for us to see things through the caregiver's eyes, to recognize their love, to recognize their sadness, their stress, their anger, whatever feeling it is. So again, I want to stress that looking from the outside is not a wrong view, it's just an insufficient view. What we really want to do, though, or what we want to add to our view then, after we've had our stretch and looked at this beautiful picture from Vermont, we want to look at dementia from the inside out. When we look at dementia from the inside out, when we look at the who, what we're really doing is this. We're recognizing that historically, the focus was on the disease. And then I would say until a decade ago, we focused on the person with dementia. This is really what person-centered dementia care is all about. But in the last 5 years, folks who begin to look at dementia as a disability, people who talk about the strengths of people living with dementia, who talk about, as you heard our women from Ontario talk about, their strength and courage, that what they want us to see is their personhood. So what they have is important, but it's not as important to them as what they have. And we have to keep this in mind. When we talk about person-centered care, then we're really talking about what are the things that we do that enhance the personhood of the person? What are the things that we do that promote a higher quality of life and support what they define as a higher quality of life? And this slide, which some of you may have seen before, is from the work of Thomas Kitwood. And the ones in the center there, he used this sort of floral kind of looking picture, are really what he saw as core. Habilitation training through the Alzheimer's Association also talks about the domains of habilitation, the domains of quality of life. I think Al Powers talks about another set. But they all have these essential features, and you can recognize them in yourself in terms of what your own humanity is. All right, I've been talking at you long enough. It's time for you to talk to one another. And we're going to do this by using the Zoom feature of breakout rooms. And what I am going to do is randomly assign you to a breakout room. And when you get in that breakout room, what I want you to do is think about somebody that you've been supporting, someone who's living with dementia during this pandemic. So to think about somebody either in your personal or professional life that you've been supporting is living with dementia, and really think about the impact that the pandemic has had on their personhood, on their comfort, on their connection to other people, on their sense of meaning in their lives and so forth, and then how you've addressed it, and then share that with the other people in your group. You'll have about, let's see, how many people do we have? We have 53 participants, are going to call it 50. I'm going to make 11 rooms, and so you will have 4 to 5 participants in the room. So again, your task, think about somebody you've been serving living with dementia. How has this pandemic impacted them, and how have you addressed it? And then we'll come back and share some of those ideas. And yeah, there we go. Here they come. Thank you all. And as you rejoin the main group, if you have any observation or idea that came up that you would like to share in the chat box, please feel free to do so. I'm going to get set up with our slides, but please Feel free, all the break rooms should be completely closed in about 15 seconds. All right. Well, welcome back to everyone. I think we're probably all back in the main room. So let's just recap where we've been on person-directed care. And again, if you have any ideas to share that came up in your small group, please feel free to put them in the chat box. So remember, what we're really trying to do in person-directed dementia care is to make sure that we take the perspective of the person in the care and marry that to our clinical knowledge. We use our clinical knowledge to figure out better ways to work with the person, better ways to help them work around their deficits, better ways to address their strengths, and use our clinical knowledge really to monitor their health, which they may or may not be able to or focused on for themselves. We emphasize abilities over inabilities, and we do all of this because it reflects our core values, but also because it works better. So whatever reason you need to do it, do it. Simple ways to take some action steps: listen to people's stories and stories about something other than related to their care need. Connect people who are living with dementia that you're serving with other people who are living well with dementia. And one way to do that is through the DAA. One thing I didn't mention is their program called Dementia Mentors. And they actually have people living with dementia who are able to communicate with others, but well enough along the journey that they are able to help other people who are at the start of that journey really deal with the range of emotions that come up, the ideas, and they give them a lot of tips. And then finally, I'm going to just keep hitting this. Make sure you focus on what people can do rather than what they can't. Before I take questions, I want to just go through this module on behaviors and behaviors communication. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, and then I'm going to open the floor to questions, whether there's a particular question you have about dementia or about behavioral expressions of need. So the takeaway here: behavior is communication. All behavior has meaning. Make that a mantra. Recite it until it becomes rote. All behavior has meaning. They are not just symptoms of an illness or a disease like Alzheimer's, though they may also be symptoms of a disease. What's important about behaviors is to understand them. And that is why whenever we are confronted with a behavior that we find difficult or challenging or is distressing to the person, that our first question is, what's going on here? What is this person trying to tell me? How do I understand it? Not how do I stop it? People communicate for a reason. And when they are trying to communicate something through their behavior, it is because they have an unmet need, or they have a feeling they're trying to let us know how they're doing at that moment, or because they have an intention. It's a problem-solving kind of behavior from their perspective, or because they're simply not trying, but they're reflecting something about their identity. So a common example of this, of course, is in a setting where people are not supposed to leave. We will often call their behavior when they try to leave elopement or exit seeking. And what is different about our perspective than theirs is that for the person who is worried about the person with dementia going outside and getting lost, we call that going outside unattended a problem. From the perspective of the person living with dementia, it is a problem solved. They want to be on the other side of the door. They want to be outside. We don't always know why. Maybe they're lost, confused, looking for something. Maybe they just want some fresh air. Maybe they're just bored. Don't know why. But from their perspective, it is a problem solved, not a problem. I want to be outside. I'm inside, I go out the door, I've solved a problem. So perspective taking is so important when you're trying to understand a behavior. And it's important that we use both ours and understand why we call it a problem, and understand the other person's and why it's not a problem to them. When people are trying to communicate something about their needs, one of the very useful schemas, I think it's not the only one, is Maslow's old hierarchy of needs. And so I reproduce it here for you just for reference. I think we're all familiar with it. But the real takeaway here is that people's needs are not just biological. They're not just for safety and security. They are also for social connection, for love, for attachment. They're also for feeling good about themselves, for self-esteem needs, for having joy, purpose, and meaning in life. And although this is in classic Western style, a hierarchy, as though self-actualization is the most important thing, they're really all present to varying degrees at different times. And one is not more important than another. I can tell you that for the person who is starving, living under the elements, that self-actualization is not the most important thing. Being fed and clothed and sheltered becomes a lot more important. So try to get rid of that hierarchy piece of it, but recognize that each level of need is dependent on, or full meeting of that need is dependent on meeting others before it. And that's true for people with or without dementia. People try to communicate something through their behavior, not just for the sake of communication, because they want something to change. They either want something to start happening that isn't, trying to get you to do something, or they're trying to get you to not do something, trying to get you to stop. And it's important that we make that distinction. What is being communicated here and why? And what does this person want to have happen? And when we arrive at that point where we're saying they want something to change, we need to ask the question, what? What needs to change? Is it the environment? Is it me? Is it what I'm doing? Is it the way I'm interacting? The last person that we kind of go to for who or what needs to change is the person who is trying to express something through their behaviors. I have a quick chat box question here I'm going to answer. I don't know the answer to your question, how you find a dementia mentor locally. But here's the great thing about one of the silver linings about COVID. You can have a virtual dementia mentor from anywhere. And in fact, one of the really successful mentors, Pauline, who's part of Dementia Action Alliance, now lives in Arizona. At the time she became a dementia mentor, she was living in Cincinnati, Ohio, and her mentees, if you will, lived in Indiana and Michigan, and I forget where else. So geography is not a barrier. In those days, it was telephone. Now it's probably video. So thank you for your question. And again, resource there would be the DAA. And there may be some local dementia mentors. Alzheimer's Association may be doing this now. I really don't know. But check out those two websites. Back to my story. All behavior has meaning. Tries to communicate something, wants some change, what change is needed, and we look at all the possibilities, including the environment and including our behavior. And remember, it's easier to change ours than somebody else's. That's true in all of life. It's not even that easy to change our own behavior, but it's a heck of a lot easier than trying to get someone else to change. And what we often find is that when we change our behavior, the other person will often change in response to that. I'll have some examples of that in just a moment. So I really want you to practice saying this. I want you to practice saying all behavior has meaning until it becomes rote. And so when you are confronted with a puzzling behavior, ask, what is this person trying to tell me? A schema that I've been teaching for probably 30 years and still seems to have withstood the test of time and now has also been researched is the distinction that is important to make, between agitation and aggression. Agitation refers to those behaviors like clapping, slapping, pounding on a table, those behaviors that I would call self-referred. When I did that, those of you who might have turned away from your desk were looking down, maybe on your phone, maybe answering an email, may have looked back because this is a signal, I want your attention. Help me do something. Self-referred behaviors, that is the whole gamut of behaviors that call attention to the person, are trying to do exactly that. This is not a personality disorder of being too needy or needing too much attention. When someone tries to get your attention, full stop, that's what they want. Give it to them. Find out what it is they need. Now, if it's a repetitive pattern, you back it up a step and find out what needs are so unmet that they have to keep resorting to this behavior. So you meet those needs, because our real goal in understanding behaviors is to meet the need so that the behavior becomes useless, unnecessary, I should say. Okay? This is in such contrast to aggression, where if somebody is hitting you, kicking you, biting, spitting, pinching, calling you nasty names, they are not saying, come closer. They are saying, leave me alone. Aggressive behavior is an other referred behavior. That's the what of it. That's the message. The message of aggression is stop, leave me alone. Something's wrong, but not with me. Something's wrong with you. Very important distinction for you to understand, because it is at like such a basic level that we trigger these profound responses right through that old amygdala, the fear center. All right, we are primed to behave aggressively when we cannot flee, when we can't get out of a situation, when we can't make sense of a situation. We actually do one of three things. You remember the old fight or flight from high school biology or from nursing school or from wherever else you got your higher education. Well, it turns out that there's a fight or flee or freeze. Remember the deer in the headlights. But you will respond to danger. Okay, we will all respond to danger. And the person with dementia, person living with dementia, when they're triggered and they can't flee and they can't make sense of the situation and the situation continues, they will fight. And it is at the heart of so much aggressive behavior. So remember that aggression is a fear-based behavior, communicating to the other person, back off. There are very many common triggers. Many of these are drawn from congregate living situations. But you can see anybody being bored in their own home might become agitated, try to mix things up, try to get something going that's not. Noisy environments, be they home or in congregate living. All of these triggers, though the research is largely drawn from nursing homes, are triggers across the living space spectrum. So these are just some to keep in mind. And what I'd ask you to do right now, if you would, is to type, if you're interested, type into the chat box one or two or three distress behaviors that you might like us to talk about, or if somebody has an actual case or an actual person they'd like to talk about and a behavior, we have about 5 minutes that we could spend doing that. So I will stop sharing here for a moment and just ask you, anybody you'd like to talk about or any behaviors you'd like to get some input on. Physical aggression, arm grabbing and pulling, good. Fleeing. And Molly, I'll ask you to unpack that just a little bit, either verbally. Actually, do it verbally. You want to save you the typing. Besides, I'd love to hear your voice. It's good to see.
Hi, Dr. Wehry. Yeah, the fleeing I'm talking about is just when my dad will just get up and he can't speak, but he's wanting to get away. He wants to get away, even when he's surrounded by his very trusted caregiver wife. And so maybe it's about boredom. I don't know, but that's something that we've struggled with.
Yeah, great, Molly. Thank you very much, and thanks for unpacking that so that we know what it is we want to try to understand. This is really interesting because in the previous slide, we do tend to think about triggers, with the exception of boredom, as being somehow external, noise, impatient people, whatever. But you remind us that a lot of the triggers are invisible. And I suppose some other invisible triggers, or at least invisible at the start, would be things at that biological basis where the person is cold, hot, constipated, hungry, thirsty, that those would be internal signals. And yet it sounds like in this situation with your dad, as you describe, that all of that is kind of attended to. And there's even at the second level of of um, of needs or of understanding the need for safety and security, even in the presence of a safe and secure person. There is this movement. So one thing I would say is, as you look at that behavior, and this I'll say for all of these behaviors, the pacing, the crying, backing away, and so forth, here's how we might take a deeper dive. And we'll just use Molly's example. We ask ourselves first, and so Molly, you can just unmute and answer these questions. Is there any association, any pattern to a time of day, or on what has been going on immediately before the moving behavior happens?
I'm just trying to be really honest because I'm not there enough, I think, to say if there's a pattern. But I know that my stepmother has said that from her perspective, it seems to happen more when he's tired. And maybe he's struggling to get that across, but he's kind of worn out from whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So the first thing we do is to try to see if there's a pattern, and sometimes we know and sometimes we don't know. But things I would say to take account in that the people who will know the pattern best will be the direct care providers in some settings, family members in other settings. And we look at time of day, we look at relationship to meals, we look at weather, we look at the ambient temperature, we look at the amount of light or darkness or whatever. And in this case, we have one clue that there may be some association to physical tiredness. The other thing that I always like to do when I'm trying to think of a pattern is to make sure that I understand the movement behavior. So from one perspective, what Molly used the word fleeing, because the behavior seems to be a wanting to get away. And there is a difference between a wanting to get away and a wanting to go towards. So I would say in this situation, we actually don't know. What we know is that seemingly without any obvious external trigger, your dad gets up and leaves where he is, or wants to leave, or moves and appears uncomfortable, appears agitated, or appears distressed. So again, a self-referred behavior that says something's wrong. He doesn't know what, your stepmom doesn't know what, the care partner doesn't know what, it only knows that he is distressed. So then the next question we ask is, what does she do? What is the intervention? And what is the response to the intervention? If she seeks to reassure him, is he reassured? If she says, you look tired, you want to lay down, does he want to lay down? You can answer that, or we can just do this sort of as a thought experiment if you don't know. But that would be the next step that we would take.
Yeah, I think it's really all of those. I mean, she definitely will try to take him for a walk to another part of the house. If she can get him outside, she will, or she'll say, do you want to go and lay down in bed? And if she feels like she gets an affirmation, she'll do that. So I just feel she troubleshoots a lot, but hasn't felt like she found the one solution to it, but maybe that doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Molly, because it doesn't. Because just like all of us, we all have good days and bad days. And sometimes the reason that we're having a bad day is because we didn't get enough sleep last night. But another day, the reason that we might be cranky is because we're hungry. And another day, it might be because we've had a fight with our best friend. You know what I mean? So I do think oftentimes with people living with dementia, or when we're trying to understand their behaviors, that's what we all do. We look for the one thing that will make it better every time or make it never happen. But actually, it probably has more than one cause. And therefore, it has more than one solution. Because if you're tired, having your favorite meal likely won't help. And if you're hungry, going to bed won't help. So I think when people are trying to prevent the distress signal, if you will, then the way I would really say that is trying to anticipate the need so as to reduce his discomfort. It really is a matter of monitoring the behavior in a way that allows you to back up, right? So that you say, wow, now that I stop and think about it, as she has said, it really does seem to be when he's tired. I wondered, did we go to bed later? Did he get up earlier? Is there any relationship to change in weather? The days are very short. There's less exposure to sunlight. Is it cold and people are going out for walks less? So there's less of the day-night kind of difference. Is this a situation where if that plays a role, and particularly during this pandemic where people are going outside less, is there a role for using an artificial satellite or artificial sunlight boxes? It really, every behavior that we have here, this is a matter of taking increasingly a deep dive and never allowing ourselves to say, oh, that's it. Always saying, okay, that might be it. What else could it be? What else could it be? What else could it be? And I would say when people, when there really does seem to be, when you look at something, there's nothing obvious in the environment, nothing obvious in the care partner's behavior, and the driver really does seem to be internal. You just kind of go through the basics of what it could be and anticipate that it might not always be the same reason every day. Thanks for that example and for allowing us to work through that. Let me just see if there's another one here. You know, the physical aggression, the arm grabbing, the pulling, I think is one that I've referenced a little, but I would unpack that a little bit to say this. I can't emphasize enough how much physical aggression is a signal to stop doing what you're doing. And as this comes in, I don't know the person, but the identifier is home health iPad, then I know that this is probably a person who is encountering this behavior during home health care. And I get it. I get it when you're there to do a service and somebody is physically aggressive or pulling your arm or pushing you or grabbing or whatever, that several things are true. One, it can hurt. And two, it always makes us feel bad about ourselves. And three, it's a little scary. And four, it interferes with our ability to do the thing we want to do. I can assure you, though, that if you will simply stop and back off and say, I didn't mean to frighten you, as opposed to I didn't mean to hurt you, and do a clinical assessment in the instant. How critical is this thing I need to do? That's number one. And decide whether you have to do it. Secondly, to decide if you have to do it, what do you know about this person to know what is soothing to them, calming to them? Because if you remember that aggression is a fear-based behavior, your goal here is to not get them to stop grabbing. The goal is to make them less afraid. And if you make them less afraid or help them be less afraid, they're not going to grab. So they won't have a reason to. What I can tell you for sure does not help is when you have people who are grabbing, pulling, whatever, that bringing in reinforcements is the worst thing you can do. Invariably in congregate living situations, when a single assist, when a person has gone on, a person has gone in to help someone by themselves, and that person grabs them or pulls them or gives a behavioral message of stop, it's not at all uncommon to call in the reinforcements. But I want you to get this from the perspective of the person living with dementia. If you're living with dementia and needing care, and somebody comes in, even if they're like super nice, friendly, calm voice, hi, it's time for your bath, and you do this, because either you don't want your bath at that moment, or you don't really recognize the person, or you've just been awakened out of a reverie and you're having a little awakening hallucination, whatever it is, if that person, instead of saying, oh, I didn't mean to startle you, says instead, I need some help, and brings in another person, you've just doubled that person's fear. And now you have a situation where you kick up that amygdala response and the person becomes even more aggressive. So what I would say is, with aggressive behavior, several things. One, Pay attention to when it doesn't happen as well as when it does. That's another clue. So are there some ways of giving care, or some times of day or days of the week, or relationship to meals, or relationship to what else is going on, have any contributing factor here? Because come to think of it, he doesn't grab every time, or she does grab every time. Whatever it is, you want to do that kind of analysis. Okay, so another thing Bill just points out, Molly, I don't know if you saw in the chat box, but the other thing about behavior is that, as I mentioned, it may be a expression of something about the person's identity. And so another thing Bill reminds us to always ask is, does this behavior have anything to do with the person's former professional life? And frankly, we see that a lot in nursing homes, right? Where people who have formerly been health professionals, in particular nurses and doctors, will frequently want to make rounds. And they're not doing anything except walking door to door, or walking up and down the corridors of a very familiar environment. Well, it's 10:30 and we have one more module to go through. I hope, yeah. So that resonated with Molly, Bill. Thank you very much. And so we may have something that to us looks like fleeing or discomfort, but actually for him may be a source of joy. So maybe rather than would you like to lay down, what would you like to get into, Dad? What activity would you like? So thanks everyone for sharing your insights on that. As I said, we will in fact answer chat box questions and comments when we make the recording and when we share with you the slides. Okay, you stretch while I'm setting up here. And we're going to close out here with looking at best practices, specifically during COVID, for supporting individuals living with dementia. Quick reminder, we have lost sight, I think, a little bit in some settings of our need to still attend to the basics, right? To pay attention to general health and well-being. We're very focused, and appropriately so, on two things. We're focused on keeping the infection out and offsetting social isolation. But we have to remember the basics as well. We want to remember that we still want to pay attention to people's pain needs, and being free from pain is important. Having opportunities for exercise has never been more important, particularly as people have, by virtue of containing the virus, had their physical activity spaces curtailed. We want to make sure people have enough fluids and access to food that they like, and that is either easy to prepare or easy to eat. And people have access to regular oral care, and they live someplace that's warm enough to protect them from the elements, and preferably that is also familiarizing to them. Quick reflection or quick look back to what we've been up to, right? At the start of the COVID-19 pandemic back in March, we knew nothing. It was, after all, called a novel SARS coronavirus 2. We didn't know much about it, but we did know how to prevent ourselves from getting it, okay? So good infection control practices told us what you do with an unknown viral threat, okay? So we adopted quarantine practices, our public health messaging around abiding the 5, wash your hands for 20, don't touch your face, sneeze in your elbow, stay home if you're sick, and keep at least 6 feet apart from your fellow man. That's what we were going to do. And if we do that, we can contain this, because we know that's, well, what we're learning about, that's how this virus spreads. And then we added masks, because the evidence in favor of masks seemed to get stronger and stronger. So we added masks to abiding the 5. In congregate situations, we restricted in-person visits or closed completely. Adult day centers closed, meaning that many people living with dementia were newly home with their care partners, putting in additional stress. And for the most part, even though I know we're having a surge again to a greater or lesser degree, when we did these strategies, these risk mitigation and containment strategies, when we did them faithfully, they worked, okay? But they led to some additional challenges, and that's what we're going to talk about now. The disruption in usual routines is particularly challenging for people living with dementia. The loss of communal experiences, be they in adult day or in a communal dining area, really disruptive for people who count on not just the routine, but seeing their friends on a regular basis, even when they're not seeing their family. So that separation, that loss of ancillary services, so-called, or additional services, or home-based services that people were used to. And then I got to tell you, I am increasingly impressed with the burden of the information age and the explosion in information, both misinformation, which is the unintentional spreading of false facts, and then intentional disinformation campaigns as the conversation from public health became more politicized. And all of that has caused the two worst things that can happen for people living with dementia. It has increased anxiety and has increased uncertainty. But we can mitigate it. And I think we mitigate it best when we focus our attention on those specific areas of unintended consequences. So to the disruption in routine and the loss of communal experiences, and I think this has been happening somewhat, that we want to pay increased attention to all preferences. Okay, I mentioned this before. If you are providing a service, give the person as much choice as to when that service is provided, how it is provided, by whom it is provided, and that to the extent that we can, we honor that because it's settling. We also, I hope by now, 8 months into this, that people have in fact created new routines, new schedules, and that we adhere to those for people living with dementia as faithfully as we can, because those new individualized routines, whether it's getting up, what time you go to bed, when you eat, and so forth, begin to create a container, so to speak, for the anxiety, and it makes it easier for people living with dementia to live their daily lives. They don't have to always be unsure. And this is even if they don't have good memories. People know their routines. Any of you who have raised children or who have had pets know that even without higher cortical function, living beings get used to a schedule. And so as living beings, we want to make sure that those schedules are aligned with that person's usual preferences, and then we want to follow them. And then I think that we need to keep paying really close attention to what's fun. And to what people's individual sources of pleasure are. To this infodemic, I would say this: please, please, please limit your and the people that you serve exposure to the news. Identify one or two at most trusted sources. And I would say to you that that your state CDCs, public health agencies, and the World Health Organization are two good sources of information. Stop the doom scroll on social media. Don't get your advice from Facebook. Or if you like to get your advice from Facebook, if that works for you, then please check it out with the World Health Organization or your state CDC in terms of the advice. This has become a really crazy part of this. The area of anxiety is one I want to focus on a bit, because care partners, self-care, and your self-care as professional service providers has absolutely never been more important, because anxiety is super contagious. Frustration is contagious. People who are living with dementia develop not so much a sixth sense, but they have more high alert attention to the emotions around them. And so we want to be really, really careful about our own anxiety, our own frustration, our own whatever in serving people living with dementia. And the only way we can do that is to take better care of ourselves. The way to do that is to know better how your brain works, okay? Here's what's happening to a lot of brains. I'm convinced of this now at the societal level, that we're all like operating on fear center parts of our brain, limbic systems instead of our cortex. Here's what happens, literally, in terms of the brain chemistry, under the kind of unrelenting stress that we've been under. For one thing, our prefrontal cortex. What did I say about the frontal lobes? The highest part of our brains, the place where we can exercise judgment and wisdom and have empathy and plan and not be so rigid and concrete in our thinking. The part of our brain that allows us to be flexible and adaptable shuts down in the face of uncontrollable, unrelenting stress. We become a little bit more distracted, forgetful, disorganized. And this is not a way of doing our jobs that is particularly helpful to people living with dementia, not to mention not that helpful to our own mental health. But here's the good news. We are built to do better. Our brains are capable of managing even this uncontrollable stress, this unrelenting stress. The thing is, we need to start taking a little better charge of the way our brains work. This picture up here is really just kind of an overview to tell you, I'm going to just say a word about the amygdala, a word about the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC, and then the prefrontal I've already mentioned. And I'm going to do this quickly, not expected to memorize it. You're expected to get the big picture here. If you are like most Americans, you are now living with an overactivated amygdala. This is from our 24/7 news cycle. It is from our daily newspapers, headlines every day about the surge and so forth. So we are living with an activated part of our brain whose job it is to make us hypervigilant, to not trust anything, to worry always, and to be looking around. It disrupts our sleep. There's too much cortisol, and we have to calm that amygdala down. We have to deactivate it, not put it to sleep, but deactivate it a little bit. How do we do that? Generally speaking, the best antidote is to remove the stressor. Well, we can't in this case remove the COVID yet, but we can reduce our exposure to it. Hence the advice about the news cycle. We know that we can calm down the amygdala with physical exercise. 30 minutes of physical exercise a day seems to be about the average for most people to chill the amygdala. The deep breathing exercise, like we did at the beginning of this morning, is a way to chill the amygdala. And then finally, mindfulness practice. I'm sure you've all heard a lot about mindfulness. It's been kind of big for about 5 years. And there are whole courses you can take on mindfulness-based stress reduction. My way is a little simpler. I don't have 8 weeks to take a mindfulness course. So instead, I try to practice mindfulness techniques in kind of a regular basis. So when I am making my coffee, I am making my coffee. I am watching myself pour. I am looking at it drip. I am not thinking about other things. As a conscious activity, mindfully brewing a cup of coffee, mindfully brewing a cup of tea, whatever it is, do it mindfully. A little thing you can do right now is to mindfully look around the room, activate your seeing senses, and name 3 things. Okay? Touch 3 things. Listen for 3 sounds. Okay? This is a mindfulness practice. It's bringing you to the here and now, just like when I had you put your feet on the floor. We do this because we need to tame that amygdala and turn on our emotional regulation center known as the ACC. Okay? You chill, you acknowledge that this situation is just as sad and tragic as we think it is. And we allow ourselves to feel the pain of that and the heartbreak of it and the loss of that. And we name those feelings. Naming actually activates this part of the brain. It's as simple as that. Name your feeling, and you have given the ACC, given your cortex a leg up over that overactivated amygdala. Practice gratitudes, good timing for this. Every day, name 3 things you're grateful for. Keep a journal if you want, but you don't have to. Name them out loud. And if another person is responsible for something that, for which you are grateful, please tell them. Thank them for themselves, for being who they are. So we're going to chill the amygdala, turn on the ACC. This is how we engage the cortex. And then we get the prefrontal cortex, the PFC, ready to work. And we do this really by exercising it. We've kind of taken it offline. I think people have stopped, not all people, I'm sure not most of us, not totally stopped thinking, but it seems like many people have stopped thinking. It's like they're content to have their PFC offline and letting the amygdala rule. It's not helpful to us. So exercise your thinking skills, your planning skills, your problem-solving skills. And one of the big problems confronting us right now collectively is how to keep solving for this problem of isolation. And then practice your flexibility. If there are two good ideas on the table, take somebody else's. Doesn't always have to be your good idea. Use somebody else's good idea. Be flexible. Even if their idea isn't quite as good as yours from your point of view, if it will work, use it. Don't always do things your way just because you can. Do them somebody else's way just to flex your PFC. Anxiety is really contagious, and so is calm. And if you will use some of these antidotes on your own anxiety, you can really help deactivate the amygdala of people living with dementia. So your oxygen mask from here on out goes on first. Really want you to attend to your own breathing, to your own self-care, to your own stress busting. Limit your exposure not just to the virus, but also to the news. And here's the way I do it. Check in once a day with the news, twice a day with the CDC, and 3 times a day with those I love. It rebalances things into the way they need to be balanced. That's your take home. Now it's 10:48, and so we don't really have time to go into another virtual breakout room. So I'll ask you instead to reflect for just 1 minute, and I will time us for 1 minute, to reflect on one positive lesson that you are taking from the COVID pandemic experience to date. And the reason for this is to remind ourselves that it has not all been negative. The one I hear most, well, I won't tell you what I hear most commonly. I'll let you reflect on yours. And then I'll ask you to share with one another in the chat box instead of a breakout room. What are some things you could do with that lesson? What about that positive lesson might be helpful to your community or to your organization as an antidote to this sort of negative activation that the pandemic has caused, this sort of uncertainty and helplessness and so forth? Excuse me, because this is a way definitely of re-energizing ourselves. I'll give you just a minute to do that. I'm going to time, as I said, the 1 minute for a reflection. And I'll ask you, if you wish, to share it in the box or not, but do write it somewhere. It's a way of solidifying it that, you know, the good thing about COVID has been so focus on family, not things. Second that, the value of family. Alternative ways to help people connect has been critically important. Reconnecting with nature and gardening. I would have to say, so slower pace, I would have to say that what I hear most often is this reconnection with family. And I'm glad to see another one here, which is the minute is up, which is this discovery of being more open to other people. This discovery of maybe being a little less judgmental or critical or harsh, or a little exercise in empathy. In the early days of COVID, I think that's what moved me more than anything else, was this worldwide appreciation of really being in it together, this interconnectedness, and the compassion that so many people showed for people who were living and dying with COVID, and for frontline workers. There's also been this incredible way in which communities really cohered. That then fell apart, and it's not so unusual. But we're seeing a lot of great suggestions here, and so we will be sure to get these out to you. The ways that people have become more creative as they think creatively. And again, I think in the beginning, I was also struck by that. Some people say, I felt kind of bad about how good I felt in the early part of the pandemic, but I felt so energized and creative and problem solving. You know, it was for many people a time of feeling like they were part of something larger than themselves and trying to be helpful in something larger than themselves. So thank you very much for all of those shares. Boredom probably goes without saying. This has been for many people one of the biggest challenges of being at home all the time. And I don't have time to play for you good old Henry's video, but if you haven't ever seen this little video on music and memory, I encourage you to watch it. You know, music and memory is something that has been applied in nursing homes all around the country as a way of improving quality of life and frankly, diminishing agitation. But I think there is definitely a place for it in the home as well and in the community setting. This is not something you have to just do in a congregate place. If you're not familiar with music and memory, please go to their website. And I think the big takeaway is this: it's not sufficient to just play music from an era that people might like. What's really important is to make a playlist of favorite songs. And when people hear their favorite songs every single time, it's a real boost. I mean, neurochemically, it's a real boost. And it boosts the people around them because people tend to move a little bit and they tend to smile a little more, and sometimes they sing. And so memory is super potent. And Elizabeth's just pointing out that the Alive Inside website teaches people how to do this. So please, can't recommend it enough. I think you know about many of the interventions that are available to supporting people living with dementia. Just the act of remembering. Remember I said it's a strength to remember from long ago. Forget that you don't know what you had for breakfast. Tell me about where you grew up. Tell me about what you did. Tell me whatever it is. And to listen to those stories. Listening is one of the greatest things that you can offer other people right now. Pets have always been an important part of many people's lives. When people are no longer able to care for their pets, or they can't have a pet where they're living or whatever, robotic pets are becoming very popular as well, kind of a step up from stuffed animals. And I gotta say, the data is kind of compelling. And so check out robotic animals. The arts, laughter, daanow.org has lots of things to do at home. It's kind of like the old what to do on a rainy day, things to do during COVID. And let me stop there. Here are some ways to get in touch with me, to get in touch with us. I'd ask you to come to our Facebook page and like it, I think is the right ask, and share it with your friends. And we post tips there as well. We also have in our GWEP that I mentioned, a website that I encourage you to visit. We don't have a Twitter account, but I do. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, that's how to do it. And I will stop there with my thanks to you for being here. And we have 5 minutes. So questions, reflections, thoughts, reactions, anything at all. In the box, or raise your hand, or signal somehow. I can now scroll through all these frames, so you can raise your hand if you want, or just speak up. That also works. So Samantha, your box has lit up. I don't know what it means, but sometimes it means you're getting ready to unmute. So we do have everybody muted. You will need to unmute yourself if you wish to speak. Comments? But they'll give me an opportunity also to say that many of the area agencies on aging in Maine, perhaps in Vermont as well, have created lending libraries of tablets for people who have not Zoomed before, not used them before, aren't used to doing things online. I think many organizations have kind of stepped up that game. And we also have one through our grant for called Telehealthy. So for people in Maine who haven't heard about that yet and want to know more about it, you can be in touch with us. This one is nice. Somebody is mentioning in terms of that silver lining in COVID, watching staff pivot in such positive ways and to respond so well to the situation. Certainly bringing families together in using our various virtual platforms has been something positive. And you all are welcome for the sharing of the knowledge, and I thank you all for sharing your ideas as well. Judy, I bet you don't believe I did it, but we have 2 minutes to spare, and I don't see any other comment, questions. Oh, was there an evaluation you should complete? Thank you so much for asking. Yes, but you don't have it yet. Terry will be sending it. When, Terry?
I will send the evaluation today, and then you can expect the video and other resources within 1 week.
Oh, any ideas on coping with auditory hallucinations? First question is the auditory hallucination distressing the person? So make sure first that it's actually a problem for them. Sometimes people, and this is true for people with dementia, it's true for people with schizophrenia. Sometimes the voice, if friendly, is a companion. It's really not problematic. Sometimes it is problematic. Either it's a voice actually, or a sound they can't figure out does cause a lot of anxiety. So for a person who has problematic auditory hallucinations, there are many things non-pharmacologic that can be done. One is to first analyze when it's happening. Does it seem to be happening more when it's really noisy or when it's really quiet? It tends to happen more when it's quiet. So sometimes people who can tolerate some kind of headset or some kind of earbuds, playing their favorite music is great for auditory hallucinations because the brain will turn its attention to the real sound and not the manufactured sound. That'd be a way to think about hallucinations. So headsets with music, not headsets with quiet, because auditory hallucinations may come out more when it's quiet. Auditory hallucinations also tend to diminish when a person is engaged actively in something they really enjoy doing. So rather than going after the auditory hallucination itself, so to speak, another thing you can do is to really actively work with a person for what they enjoy doing over the course of a day. And the thing, remember, about working with people with dementia, it's not really enough for us to know what they like to do and to kind of put those things in their arena. We sometimes have to help initiate the activity because that step may be lost. So oftentimes you may want to mimic or mime what the fun thing is so that the person just follows suit. It's also a great way to get people to eat, is to eat with them. Miming activities are a way that people have of connecting. So having a drink, water with somebody can get them to drink. And so whatever engages a person in a way that brings them pleasure is a way to diminish auditory hallucinations. Anybody else have any tips on hallucinations? And thanks, Bill, for this link. I have heard of Memory Bridge. I think actually, gosh, a long time ago, when I was still in Vermont, Bill Pendlebury at the Memory Center used to talk about the Memory Bridge. I bet it's the same one, but I'll check it out again. I haven't thought about that for a long time. Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate the feedback. And anybody have any tips from my good friends at SASH? Additional tips regarding auditory hallucinations? Okay, hearing none, it's now 11:02. So I will take my leave with my thanks for your being here, your active participation. Hope to see you all again soon. Happy Thanksgiving, and please stay safe and well and engaged.
That sounded interesting.
Yeah, it was.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.